Good morning. We have breaking news to bring you right now. I'm Maggie O'Mara.
And I'm Justin Cora. An arraignment hearing for Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students, just wrapped up in Latah County. Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were all found stabbed to death in their off-campus home on November 13th of last year. And just moments ago, Kohberger, here you see him entering the courtroom, and moments ago he stood silent when the judge asked if he wanted to enter a plea. So the judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf in the deaths of those 4 University of Idaho students.
Now, the defense asked the court to set that trial date beginning October 2nd, though Kohberger did not waive his right to a speedy trial. The defense says they'll expect that trial to take 4 to 6 weeks. The clock now starts for the state, too. They have 60 days to decide if they plan to seek the death penalty.
KTVB's Morgan Romero live outside the Latah County Courthouse in Moscow right now, where that arraignment just finished up. Morgan, what can you tell us?
Maggie and Justin, arraignments, as always, very quick, about 15 minutes this morning. Bryan Kohberger walked into the courtroom with his defense attorney after the prosecution was already in the courtroom. When the judge read him his rights and read him the penalties those charges carry should he be found guilty, and asked him if he wanted to enter a plea, his defense attorney said yes, and they chose to stand silent. When that happens, the judge enters a not guilty plea on behalf of the defendant. Kohberger had multiple options today. He could have pleaded not guilty. He could have stood silent as he did, and the judge entered that plea on his behalf. He could have asked for a continuance. This hearing would have been pushed back another week or two, or he could have pleaded guilty, which experts we talked to said was highly unlikely. His defense attorney also said that they're not prepared to go to trial immediately, but they are not going to waive Kohberger's right to a speedy trial. Therefore, they asked for an October trial date. They expect it to take about 6 weeks. Prosecution said that October date works for them as well, so the judge set Bryan Kohberger's trial for October 2nd here in Latah County District Court. I do want to say Bryan Kohberger, when he walked in, was in an orange jumpsuit. I don't know if you guys can see that video, if it's already been ingested back on your end. He looked significantly thinner than he did the first time we were here. We haven't seen him in person in a courtroom for about 4.5 months. This was also the first time that family members of the victims saw the man suspected of killing their loved ones in person, and for the first time in about 4.5 months as well. Kaylee Gonsalves' family there. It appeared that Madison Mogan's family was there as well. Other folks that we didn't quite recognize, but as those charges were being read, first-degree murder counts of those 4 University of Idaho students, you could see some of Kaylee's family members getting pretty emotional there in the courtroom today. Again, Bryan Kohberger pleading not guilty with the judge standing silent, the judge entering that not guilty plea on his behalf. His trial date set for October 2nd here in Latah County.
And Morgan, obviously, you mentioned the emotions. I heard there were some tears, some sniffles from the families there as the judge read each of their names. Tell us more about what the feeling was in that courtroom. It seemed really somber.
Yeah, absolutely somber. You know, we walked in on the left-hand side. There was media as well as some other members of the public. We lined up really early to get in there this morning. The family members had spots designated for them through the Latah County Prosecutor's Office, and they filed in a few minutes before that arraignment started. Very quiet. Kaylee Gonsalves' sister was there. Her parents were there. Those are the ones that I mainly recognize, as well as Madison Mogan's family. You know, not a lot of talking. It appeared that an older family member of Kaylee Gonsalves', she was the one that was crying, wiping her nose and her eyes. And, you know, unfortunately, I want to point this out. The judge did mispronounce Kaylee's name, and her family was shaking their head. They were really not happy with that after the fact. They told the prosecutor's office that I heard the sister saying, you know, it took a lot for us to be here. This is really hard for us to be here. The least that he could do was pronounce her name right. So that was the only verbal words that I heard come out of their mouths.
And Morgan, again, just following your great coverage on Twitter, along with Alex Duggan, who's up there with you, said that the accused here, Bryan Kohberger, really only said one word a few times during this hearing, right? Just saying yes, answering the judge's questions.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So when an arraignment starts, the judge says, you know, all this information that I'm telling you is stuff you've heard before in your initial appearance. So he says, do you understand your rights? And he reads him his rights, and he says, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say to anybody that's not your attorney can be used against you. To that, he said, do you understand? And Bryan Kohberger said, yes, I do. Otherwise, it was just one-word answers, yes, when he was asked if he understood the charges against him, those 4 counts of first-degree murder and the deaths of Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Gonsalves, as well as that burglary charge as well for entering 1122 King Road with the intent to commit murder. So when he was asked if he understood those charges and the maximum penalties that those charges carry, he just said yes. Important to note as well, in Idaho, first-degree murder, he's facing 4 counts. First-degree murder on its own carries up to life in prison or the death penalty. And prosecutors have 60 days now that a plea has been entered to file an intent to seek the death penalty in this case. So we'll be watching closely on the Idaho Cases of Interest page to see if and when they do file that notice of intent to seek the death penalty.
And Morgan, I'm sure there's people at home wondering, why did he stand silent? Why did he not just say not guilty? And legal experts do say that sometimes a defendant might do that if they want to delay proceedings or possibly cop a plea down the road here. What have legal experts told you about what that means exactly, and what does it leave the door open to?
You know, Maggie, I'm not quite privy to whether or not this leaves the door open for a plea agreement down the road. You know, maybe potentially that is on the table because he doesn't want to face the death penalty and he could spend up to life in prison. But I don't want to speculate here. I didn't specifically ask what that means. I have, however, covered multiple trials, including some high-profile ones in Idaho, where the defendant has stood silent. The judges enter that not guilty plea on their behalf. No matter what, whether you enter a not guilty plea or you plead not guilty, it still moves the case forward, and the judge then sets a trial date and moves forward as though trial is happening. And because he didn't ask to waive his right to a speedy trial, that trial is still happening within that statutory obligated 6-month period. So I don't know that it delays anything. I don't know that it leaves the door open, to be quite frank with you. I do know, though, that it is pretty much the same thing as saying, I'm not guilty.
Great points there,
Yes.
Morgan. Thank you so much.
October 2nd, that's what we're looking at right now. It seems awfully close, but as you mentioned, it's in that 6-month window, and it's probably the last place they can place this trial, giving the defense enough time to prepare for the trial. Morgan, we all know how long that's going to take for both sides to get ready for such a huge undertaking. I know you've spoken to attorneys about that. Share with us exactly what that's going to entail over the next 6 months as we prepare for this major trial that's going to garner national attention.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we saw it with the Vallow Daybell case. We're going to see it with Chad Daybell's case next summer. This trial could possibly move to Ada County because Latah County is so small and this judicial district in and of itself is small. It is going to be difficult to find a fair and impartial jury, you know, anywhere in the state, in the country even, that doesn't know about this case. So the likelihood that this moves to Ada County, because there's a better option to find a fair and impartial jury, a bigger jury pool, is highly likely. Perhaps it moves to southeast Idaho, somewhere away from this general area. They've set the trial for October 2nd, lasting 6 weeks. And the defense said, we're not prepared to go to trial right now. We do believe we will be prepared by then. In the meantime, what they do is they share something called discovery, and that's already been occurring. The defense has already filed motions to compel the prosecution to submit any evidence it has, whether it's digital evidence, DNA evidence, interviews that Bryan Kohberger has done with Moscow police, with police in Pennsylvania, search warrants, affidavits. So this is just a standard part, and we've reported on this very recently on KTVB and KTVB.com, that the defense has said, give us all you have. And the prosecution has said, we have thousands of audio files, of video files, of reports that we're sharing with you, because you are statutorily obligated as the prosecution to provide the defense any information you have so as not to catch them off guard. It's also important to point out that we didn't talk about this yet, guys, but we've been covering it. This all was expedited because of a grand jury indictment. So a group of 16 community members has heard some of the evidence, the probable cause in this case. So any probable cause that the prosecution has against Bryan Kohberger, why they believe that he committed the crimes, that's been presented to a grand jury, and that's who indicted Bryan Kohberger and got us to this point. So this waives his preliminary hearing, which is also a probable cause hearing, and he will not have that preliminary hearing come June. So we personally, as the media and the public, are not going to hear that probable cause. That was all done in private with the grand jury. What we will see come out is documents being filed, as they already have, of discovery, information being shared between the prosecution and the defense, and hopefully we'll get a glimpse as to what exactly the prosecution has on Bryan Kohberger. They're not going to present everything. They're not going to show their full hand until we get to trial. So if they're saying already, we've got thousands of pieces of audio, video, reports, text messages, what have you, on this individual, we expect there to be a lot of evidence that they could potentially present at trial, as well as, witnesses. And that's one of the reasons that prosecutors asked to convene a grand jury in private, was so that these witnesses, these vulnerable victims and witnesses, like the surviving roommates, don't have to go in front of a judge and be cross-examined by the defense. Because in a grand jury indictment, the defense and the defendant are not there to ask any questions. It is solely the prosecution. So we do expect in the trial for those vulnerable witnesses and victims to testify as well. There's going to be a lot of people that we hear from that we haven't heard from so far, and that we may not, know what they're going to say until that trial in October.
Absolutely.
Morgan, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to learn a lot more, and we're going to have to parse through, as the jurors as well, parse through a lot more information during those court proceedings, the trial in October. Let's go back to today, and let's take you further inside the courtroom here and actually hear the proceedings today, as you heard Morgan talk about the judge asking these questions of Bryan Kohberger.
Do you understand the charge in count one? Perfect.
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count two, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count three, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count four, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count five, murder in the first degree? Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
And Ms. Taylor, is Mr. Kohberger prepared to plead to these charges?
Your Honor, we will be standing silent.
And because Mr. Kohberger is standing silent, I'm going to enter not guilty pleas on each charge, counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, at this juncture, the state has 60 days to give notice of intention to seek the death penalty.
As Morgan mentioned, 60 days the state has to decide whether or not they're going to seek the death penalty in this case. Morgan, we know we've heard from some of the families that feel strongly about the death penalty being pursued here. I know they are there this morning, but talk to us about the gag order. Can the family speak to the media on the steps as they have in the past, or are those days over?
Maggie, I'm glad you asked that question, because it has been really unclear, and it's actually something that media all over the state of Idaho has been fighting in this case, the non-dissemination order, to see whether or not family members can talk. Steve Gonsalves, Kaylee's dad, has spoken to some media throughout this gag order. His attorney, Shannon Gray, has spoken as well. But there's been a lot of confusion around that gag order, who it applies to. When it came out, we initially thought it only applied to the prosecution, to any law enforcement involved in this case, to the defense, to the defendant, and to attorneys representing the victims. But we didn't know if it applied to the families, and we haven't heard from the families in this case as that gag order has been in place, because it's just, I think that they're confused and they don't want to do anything wrong. However, we did hear yesterday from Ben Mogan. He spoke with the Today Show, and he talked about his beautiful little girl, Madison Mogan, and they've started Maddie May Day because her birthday is coming up, and they want people to honor Maddie's memory and to do things for other people that are really kind acts of service in her honor, and to remember the beautiful, precious, caring soul she was. But take a listen to how hard this process has been for Mr. Mogan.
This has been the most difficult thing that any of us will ever go through, and it's just important to stay close to your loved ones and your family in times like this, I would say. I mean, a lot of us are going to counseling. I've gone to counseling, and it's helped a lot, just being able to talk about things and remember her in the best way that we can and keep her memory alive.
So much attention right now on Bryan Kohberger, the man suspected of killing Madison Mogan, as well as her best friend, Kaylee Gonsalves, their roommate, Xana Kernodle, and Xana's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, in that home just off campus at the University of Idaho, November 13th, 2022. So 6 months ago this happened. I showed you guys this morning and I showed you last night how the house itself is now boarded up. The windows and doors all over 1122 King Road are boarded up with plywood. There's a fence that's been put up around the property as well. There's also a little blue security trailer that's being manned by a security guard. We hadn't seen that the last time we were here in January. The feel here in the town of Moscow, similar to when we were here the last time because it was winter break, it is now summer break. So school got out more than a week ago. Seniors graduated. The victims were awarded with posthumous degrees for their time at University of Idaho as vandals, and they were recognized during that spring commencement ceremony. But there's not a lot of people here in this college town, which of course there's an influx of people come fall and springtime for school. So it is sort of an eerie feeling here in Moscow, somber as it was in the courtroom as well, sort of a micro of the macro feel. You know, Alexandra Duggan, my coworker, went to school here. She has been speaking to folks at restaurants and bars and students, and really they don't like the media attention in this case. They don't like all of the international media, all of the national media. I'm going to step aside and just show you there are a lot of people. We're just on one side of the courthouse here. There's local media from Washington, from Idaho, all over the Pacific Northwest covering this, but there's also national media and people here in the town of Moscow, a very tight-knit, close community, don't want any more media attention. And of course, we come here when these important hearings happen for the man suspected of killing those 4 University of Idaho students, and the community rallies together as we're here, and they're kind to us, of course. But I think that they don't like the negative attention as well. And it's a really fine line to balance, as you guys know, for us to cover the suspect and also shed light on the victims, but also give the people in this town of Moscow the peace and privacy that they have been yearning for the last 6 months.
Another reason why the trial really will probably be moved, as you mentioned, because it's just, it's not going to work there. The kids need to go to school, people need to go on with their lives, and really they've been disrupted so much already, Morgan. One thing about that King Road house that I did want to ask you, yes, it's barricaded, there's the security guard, we have the fencing up now. There was some talk about tearing it down soon and building that memorial, and then we heard that some family members actually wanted them to keep it up during the trial in case the jury needed to walk through. What is the latest on that? Are you privy to any of that information?
I haven't checked the latest on that, but that's exactly right. They were going to demolish the home, and they are still preparing to do so. However, they're not doing it right now because they've been collecting so much evidence throughout the house and, of course, in the driveway when those students' cars were parked in the driveway, and they were processing all of that evidence, and it was really important that that stayed intact for the prosecution and for the defense, because the defense then sent their own crews in there as well to collect. So it could be that after trial they demolish the home. I don't expect it to happen before October, before that 6-week trial begins.
Alrighty, hopefully, though, we can get through that trial, the community can move on.
Yes.
Parents can have some sort of closure. I know that they're asking for justice in that case. They think that prosecutors have found their man, the murderer of their children there in Moscow. But certainly that community has been through so much. Morgan, you talked about it, certainly the media attention, but also just for students murdered there right off campus, now supposedly normally would have been a time for celebration, and as you said, just a really somber tone in the courtroom today.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for your reporting and your hard work on this case from the very beginning. And let's just do a quick recap for our viewers at home watching right now. Today, Bryan Kohberger stood silent when the judge asked him about his plea, so he entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. We also learned the defense would like that trial to start around October 2nd. That's what we're looking at right now. That gives them about 6 months' time to prepare for this trial. You know, there's a lot of working parts here. They have to get ready, they have to prepare, and the state, Justin, has 60 days to decide whether or not they'll pursue the death penalty for Kohberger. We know we've heard from some of these parents of the victims that they want to see the death penalty in this case. So we'll have to see if all the victims' families get together, what they all decide on and what they're all wanting.
And in the months leading up to the trial and during that trial, we're going to start to learn more information about all this, and possibly even a motive or a reason, according to the prosecutors, about why Kohberger might have done this, why they think he did this. That's really the lingering question over all of this. How could anyone do this, let alone Bryan Kohberger? Yes, so 4 to 6 weeks, October 2nd of this year is when we're expecting that trial to start. Going to take a while. Still a lot of work to be done by the prosecution and defense until we get there.
And we're going to break right now, but the noon show is coming up with Doug Petcash. He's going to have a full recap. If you're just joining us and you missed some of this coverage, don't worry. We're going to have it all for you right here. We also have it on all of our platforms this morning. You can check it out on social media, ktvb.com, on our app. And we'll be back today at noon with a lot more for you. And then, of course, on the news at 4.